decorated real pretty. Real pretty.
You could even put some more in the other one.
Sure.
Gotten your families are still here, even though we can't have the services here. We are remembering you, and some of us will be showing up beside the theater where they have been showing your film. I went Wednesday and saw Cobra, which was fabulous. And we all miss you, and we love you, and we will join you one day in eternity. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it.
Okay. Well, we're going to need one for June.
Also, I want to go to the first where I could have been.
We'll take the class. Let's put this in there too.
Take your picture for the newsletter.
Why am I using your time?
Who sent you?
Water's on side here.
I'm glad somebody put some flowers on.
Yeah, me and Pat brought this from, there's a newsletter.
Okay, ready? Wait, this Tracy. You make Carmen Evans of it? You make Carmen Evans?
Yes, I have some.
Take care. Do you want you to, or just along with me?
Both ways.
You can't see. Oh, there you are. Here.
I want to take a picture of you.
Yeah,
on
they're
our
camera
camera.
interview for the newsletter for the flowers. Right. Okay.
Yeah, it was quite a
Mitchell at the organ. Now we're ready to start the 70th Annual Memorial Services for Rudolph Valentino. But before we begin, I think you'd be interested in an explanation. The reason we had to come over here, Lee Howe of the Toluca Lake Methodist Church.
Please remain seated and let us pray. Creator and source of all our good, we come here today to celebrate life, and in particular, the life of one man. We never cease to be attracted by lives that are full of energy and creativity, as we would wish that our lives could always be. But in our wishing, we acknowledge that you, O God, are the giver of life. And we seek to let your truth for us guide our hopes. Quicken us with new vision of what might be, as we remember the life of one who brought to reality his dreams of what he wanted so much to be. Amen.
Today I'll be speaking about Catherine MacDonald. This is her right here. Today marks the 70th anniversary of the death of Rudolph Valentino, and I am speaking on Catherine MacDonald, one of his leading ladies, and the sister of our late beloved friend Mary McLaren. The daughter of a theater owner, Catherine Agnew MacDonald, was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania on December 14, 1891. She started out as a chorus girl in a musical comedy. Her interest in film started after visiting her sister Mary McLaren at the studio. The first real opportunity to display her ability was afforded to her when William S. Hart selected her to play the leading female opposite him in Shark Monroe. She was immediately re-engaged to play opposite Mr. Hart in Riddle Guan, and repeated her success. Following this, she played opposite Douglas Fairbanks in Mr. Fix-It, and soon was known as the American Beauty. Some of her other films were The Squaw Man, The Woman Thou Gavest Me, and The Beauty Market. Her two films with Rudolph Valentino are Once to Every Woman and Passion's Playground. Her final film was 1926's Old Love's Anew. Catherine MacDonald was married 3 times, the first being Malcolm Strauss, the well-known illustrator, whom she divorced when she came to Hollywood. Her second marriage was to Charles Johnson, whom she divorced in 1926. After her retirement in 1928, she married Christian R. Holmes, an heir to the Fleischmann Yeast Corporation. The couple were divorced amid sensational charges in 1931, but were reconciled 2 years later, eventually parting in 1934. Holmes died in New York in 1944. During her later years, Miss MacDonald devoted herself to philanthropy and the protection of animals, serving as president of the Santa Barbara Humane Society for several years. She was active during World War II in the American Women's Voluntary Services. In 1954, her right leg was amputated because of diabetes. After a succession of illnesses necessitating repeated surgery, she passed away June 4th, 1956. Thank you.
I have a Japanese film crew here, so if any of you happen to be in Japan later in the week or later in the year, you might see yourselves on television. Now we have someone that hasn't been with us before, a prominent publicity man, and at Warner Brothers, and who was present at Campbell's funeral parlor in New York at the time of the Valentino funeral services. So he'll have an interesting story to tell you. Mr. Bob William.
My name is Bob William, and they've asked me to come here. And can you hear me way in the back? Yes? Yes? They've asked me to say a few words about my experience at Rudolph Valentino's funeral. And I think I'm the only one in the world living who was there. And because I was there, it changed my whole life, and I'll tell you why, and I'll go quickly. I had worked in my uncle's haberdashery in the St. George Hotel in Brooklyn, where I got $1 a day, and I worked on Saturdays, and I hated it. And when the day was ended, I got on the subway to go home at the other end of Brooklyn, and I sat down in a short seat in the subway, and a woman sobbed and cried pitifully. And in those days, you didn't speak to anybody in a subway. But I was so taken with her that I said, "Madam, is there anything wrong?" And she said, "Rudy is dead." And I said, "Who is Rudy?" And she got mad at me because it was Rudolph. She said it was Rudolph Valentino, of course. And I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, and is there anything I can do?" And she sobbed all over me. And from that day on, I was fascinated with the effectiveness of movies on people. And my father's office was across the street from the Campbell's parlor, and I sat there with him and looked across the street at the people who had surged into the street to attend his funeral, and I was astounded at the fact that 3,000 people an hour passed his bier 24 hours a day for 3 days, and that was established as the most attended funeral in history, and I think to this day that figure stands. The fact that Valentino called my attention to the motion picture industry changed my whole life, and I had seen him in The Sheik and his other pictures, and he was a fascinating character, even to young children. And from then on, I gravitated toward the motion picture industry. And when I graduated from college in New England, the only job I could get was an office boy at Warner Brothers Pictures in New York City, and I got $15 a week. My boss, Charlie Einfeld, saw my face fall when I heard the $15 a week figure. I had a nice BS degree from Colby. I thought I deserved better. And he said, "That's $10 a week more than you would make as a law clerk in New York today." So I snapped up the $15, and I stayed at Warner Brothers for 10 years, during which I handled Betty Davis and Ingrid Bergman and Errol Flynn and Jimmy Cagney and Pat O'Brien and some of the greats, and that was a marvelous result of my having become interested in the motion picture industry. This is my 60th year in Los Angeles, and I'm very grateful to be able to give you some of my feelings about these experiences. Thank you very much.
Friend, Mr. Austin here, the owner of the theater, and he'll tell us about Valentino's silent pictures and all the other famous films that he shows.
Good to have all of you here today. The Silent Movie Theater was established in 1942 by John Edward and Dorothy Hampton. It was their tribute to the silent stars, and of course one of them was Rudolph Valentino. He was actually a favorite of both the Hamptons. And in that day and age, there wasn't much interest in saving silent films. So we owe a great deal to Hampton because he did save a number of Valentino films in those years. He ran the theater from 1942 to 1979, when his health failed him, and so it was closed until it reopened in 1991. And of course, we used to spend some Sundays, the Hamptons and I. We go up in the canyons looking for Valentino's falcon lair, and One time we found the stable there where he kept his horses. We had been to our house, and the people were very nice to allow us in the house to look around. So it was always an interesting experience going out on Sunday looking for these historical places. Since we reopened, of course, we run all the Valentino films. The Eagle and the Son of Chic are particularly my favorite. On this side, there's Vilma Benke. That costume was made for the Eagle by my mother. And she also made a costume for Vilma Benke and the Son of Chic. She never spoke much about Valentino, but I know that she thought very fondly of him. In that day and age, you didn't talk much about what you knew in Hollywood if you wanted to keep on working. And she worked for herself to be a meal on that, and she worked there for 30 years, so no telling how much she knew. At any rate, since we reopened, we ran one new film that Hamptons never did run. That was Miranda Lady Letty. And just recently, 2 nights ago, we ran Cobra, which everybody enjoyed. We had a full house for that. Now next year, we're working on a Lost Valentino film, and we expect to present that next year. It's called The Married Virgin, that nobody has seen, and then we know whereabouts of another one. So we keep searching, and who knows, maybe with luck, we will turn up Young Roger or Beyond the Rocks one of these times. So thank you very much.
Bob Mitchell, founder of the world-famous Mitchell Boys Choir, and he'll tell of his experiences playing for various Valentino films, and he'll also introduce his guest singing star.
Bautista. Rudolph Valentino is the most vividly remembered in the image of an Arab chieftain in the Sheik. So why do I think of him first as a Russian Cossack? Bob Mitchell played for Silent Pictures on the pipe organ, and the first Valentino picture I played for was The Eagle, in which Valentino, as a Cossack officer in the Royal Palace in Moscow, attracts the romantic interest of the Empress, played by Louise Dresser. And these are the pictures I played for The Eagle first, and then the Cobra. And I play here now for Mr. Austin on Wednesday nights for the Silent Pictures. And night before last we had the Cobra. Last time I played for it was in 1925, but it was very vivid in my memory. And it's interesting, it ran first run at the Metropolitan, which was a Grauman theater at the corner of 5th and Hill. And it was changed the name to the Paramount, and then it was torn down and replaced by the Home Savings and Loan Building. But it was interesting, in 1924, just before Christmas time, the Messiah was given over at the Philharmonic Auditorium, which used to stand at 5th and Olive. And my parents were very highbrow, and we came in to hear the Messiah, and they brought a couple of neighbors that were not quite so classic-minded, and they were bored to death with the sacred music. And after it was over, Cobra was playing over at the Metropolitan. So they said, we're going to go over to see Rudolph Valentino. And I said, oh, I want to go, can I go, can I go, can I go? My parents said, well, of course not. And they said, oh, let him go. They thought my parents were too strict. And they said, oh, it'll be an imposition. Oh, we'd love to have him. Well, I had my parents over a barrel. They wouldn't have had me see anything like that for anything in the world. So I went over and saw that, and it was very vivid in my mind that there is a replica of a coiled cobra in brass, an antique that figures in an antique transaction. And Nita Naldi was the reigning vamp after Theda Vera. And I think the reason she never became a star is because she was always identified as such a wicked woman. But she was the vamp, and as Rudolph Valentino looks at this cobra, in his mind it fades into Nita Nolly, very scantily clad, and he says, "You're like a cobra ready to strike." And so in Pasadena, it was very, very strict, very righteous. We used to say they had a church on every corner, and the censors would just chop things out. So they chopped that out of the picture, so we never knew where it got the name. So I was, but having seen it in Los Angeles, of course, I knew all about the central part, and then the amusing part in Pasadena. The high school seniors would all come out to the last show. The shows used to run 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. At the 9 o'clock show Saturday night, they had to patch up the film and put all the things back that the censors had taken out. So you'd always hear these guffaws from the high school boys at the last, so they put that in the last show. Well, at any rate, I was very much amused to see that. My parents wouldn't let me see The Sheik. I was a little too young to play at that time, and I never saw it till last year, and I played for it here, and I can see why my parents wouldn't let me see it. But I learned something there. I was very much surprised. I thought the Kashmiri song was connected with the young Raja, because that was a very popular personalization that Rudolph Valentino made. But actually, in seeing the sheet, which I had not seen before, the sheet music is photographed and shown up, the Kashmiri song, and Agnes Ayres hears that, not knowing who sings it at the first part. Then later on in the film, he sings it to her, and it's thrown on the screen again, and she says, "Well, that was you I heard the first time." So that's very interesting. That's the only record that Valentino ever made. When you hear it, you can see why, but his popularity put him out even as a singer. And that was a collector's item. I've heard it over the radio. And I also wanted to remind you that in those days the hair had to be oiled down to the head like a snake, and my father didn't approve of that at all. And I had a little neighbor boy whose mother let him grow long hair and paste it down. The housewives had a fit. We didn't have washing machines in those days, and we'd get all the Vaseline on the pillow slips and ladies have to wash that out. But that was the style of the show. I got to see Blood and Sand. I played for that, and Nita Nolly's in that too. And although Valentino was Italian, he became so identified with the Spanish culture. He was a comedian or in the little short comedies over at Universal, and without being outstanding. And Gene Mathis, a writer down at MGM, realized what a possibility, potentiality he had on the camera, and she insisted that he be cast in the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And that the Apocalypse is the Catholic name for the Book of Revelation, so in that one, that made him into an instant star, and after that he made The Sheik. So anyway, is Mr. Riemann next? At this time, it would be appropriate to bring in our wonderful guest singer, Mr. Ken Remo. Would you come in and we'll have a little discussion? Mm-hmm. You're an opera singer, and you've been in
I've been with the Music Center Opera, Long Beach Opera, the New York Philharmonic. I go quite a ways. And I've been singing for the Valentino tributes for the past, I believe, 6 years.
Yes.
5 or 6 years, and I've enjoyed them very, very much. And it's sort of fun being in this theater today. The song I will sing is going to be the Kashmiri song. It's in your mouth. I guess it doesn't. The song that Valentino had recorded, and it's a very beautiful song. And if we do it with dignity and with affection, you'll see how beautiful the song really is. Bob, you ready?
Almost.
Okay.
Here we go.
Pale hands I love beside the Shalimar. Where are you now, who lies beneath your spell? Whom do you lead on rapture's roadway far, before you agonize them in farewell, before you agonize them in farewell. Pale hands I loved beside the Shalimar. Where are you now? Where are you now? Pale hands pink-tipped like lotus buds that float on the cool waters where we used to dwell. I would much rather fell to around my throat, crushing out life than waving me farewell, crushing out life than waving me farewell. Pale hands I loved beside the Shalimar. Where are you now? Where are you now? Over the desert wild and free rides the bold sheik of Araby. His Arab band at his command follows his love's caravan under the shadows of the palms. He sings to call her to his arms. I'm the sheik of Araby. Your love belongs to me. I'll gaze into your eyes.
of paradise. The stars that shine above will light our way to love. You'll rule this land with me. The Sheik
Very nice. Let's have a nice round of applause for this. It was a beautiful job. Very nice. Good, good. Absolutely good. Very, very funny that him and I were in the original company of Oklahoma about 40, 50 years ago, and here we just met. After 40 years. Isn't that funny? And he sings better now than he ever did. Incidentally, I would like to just say one word that I have a tape recording of Rudolph Valentino singing. And I, several years ago, went around to bookshops and antiques. You know how you go around looking for antiques and everything. All of a sudden, I come across this recording. It says Rudolph Valentino, and honors the Kashmiri song. I said, oh my God, I've got to get this record. So in the process, I had it before over 25, 30 years ago, and I said, just in case something happens to this record, I would like to take it and put it on a cassette tape. So don't you know that eventually the record broke and I have it on the tape. I think it's the only record of Valentino in the world that's singing the Kashmiri song. I would like to put it on now for you to hear.
Miss Patricia Lampion, who is the publisher of the Valentino newsletter, to read some of his poems.
A true romantic, and he loved poetry, and he also wrote it. In 1923, a small volume of his poems and thoughts and ideas was published under the name of Daydreams. This particular book comes from Italy. They just published it last year, and they have the English poems on one side and translated into Italian on the other. And I thought the title was especially interesting. It was just translated to me this morning, and in Italian, Daydreams, they have put it down as sleeping with eyes open. The first poem I would like to read is simply called You, and although people who knew him knew that he did write it for Natasha, the love of his life, most women who read it were hoping it was written for them. You are the history of love and its justification, the symbol of devotion, the blessedness of womanhood, the incentive of chivalry, the reality of ideals, the verity of joy, idolatry's defense, the proof of goodness, the power of gentleness, beauty's acknowledgement, vanity's excuse, the promise of truth, the melody of life, the caress of romance, the dream of desire, the sympathy of understanding, my heart's home, the proof of faith, sanctuary of my soul, my belief of heaven, eternity of all happiness, my prayers, you. The second selection is not a poem. It's something that I think when you get to know Valentino through reading about him and seeing his films, this pertains a lot to what he felt. And it's called On a Stretch of Sandy Beach. On a stretch of sandy beach, I see not of human presence, but upon looking closer, a remembrance of the past. I sit upon a rock and meditate upon what once was once. I see myself in all the splendor of my youth. I see my boon companion Hope, and one other, whose name I best forget. We walked, Hope and I, but ever the unnamed one stalked by my side. I turn to gaze in fascination at my companion, who speaks not, but forever stalks silently beside me. I finally forget my hope, to gaze in interest at the other. Hope, neglected, lags behind, until we walk alone, myself and the unnamed one. We walk forever, but the walk brings us to the abyss of the world. What name has that one whose identity I fail to know? O eternity, thou art my sight and knowledge. It was doubt whose companion I became. The last poem is one that Valentino said this was his favorite, and it's called Evensong. I sing a song to the sapphire sky that curtains a sleeping earth. I sing a song to the stars on high that mark a jewel's worth. My feeble voice, so weak it sounds, yet a puny, earthy cry, yet when its echo comes to me, angelic voice in harmony, I know it is not I. It was belief that gave it wing, that weakling voice of mine, and carried it where angels sing, God's melody divine. Thank you.
Just think about it, 6 years. That's Valentino's, really, his reign in Hollywood, 6 years. What is 6 years? It's really nothing. It's amazing. He came on the scene in 1920. Of course, he was working in films before then, but nobody noticed him until Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. But 1920, here he comes, and he dies in 1926. I mean, it's just mind-boggling to think of what a short career this was, but what an impact today is. 1996, 70 years now on his death. Now, if you think about it, what is 1926? Why is that so important of a date that he died? Just think about it again, that Valentino represented the silent era. He was almost the end of an era. In 1926, John Barrymore starred in Don Juan for Warner Brothers. Now, there were sound pictures all the way back to 1896, but it was the first time that all the theaters in the United States were equipped for sound in 1926, thanks to the Warner Brothers, who bet everything on this new novelty of the time to do feature films with sound. Up until then, DeForest, Phono Films, and Edison, and all the other ones were doing shorts and this novelty. Can you imagine what it would have been like when Valentino, if he would have lived, would have gone on into the sound era? Now, it's true, he did sing a few flat notes here and there, but his voice was a good voice. He had a voice, a speaking voice, that many people did not have from the silent era. So if you think about it, he sort of represents the silent era and the 1920s. You have to remember, after World War I, the time of the 20s came along, 1920 to be exact. It was really the time of the flapper era, the new era of short skirts and wild parties, and Hollywood, of course, growing leaps and bounds. 1926 also is a time when Paramount was expanding. Now, you have to remember that Valentino not only worked for Paramount, he worked for Independence, and he also worked for United Artists. And most people remember Valentino as synonymous with Paramount and the studio here on Melrose. Well, it's interesting to think about that because Valentino never worked for Paramount at the Melrose Paramount studio. Before it was Paramount, it was known as the Brunton United Studios. That's at Melrose today, at Van Ness. And United Artists was leasing space there, and that's why where Valentino was working was there, you see. So when they put up a sign a few years ago, in I think 1976, they put up a sign, Valentino Place, right there. You see, someone was putting it up Paramount related, but you have to understand that he was there before Paramount, the United Artists, so it's kind of a strange irony that his bungalow, by the way, is still there on the Paramount lot. And of course, it's been moved around and changed. But all I can tell you right now is that they have a tour at Paramount, and they go by sometimes and mention this was Valentino's bungalow. I mean, it's hard to imagine that even today, Valentino's name still crops up all the time. I mean, you have to remember that the impact of this man today in modern times is amazing. People would say, why is Valentino so important? Why are we all here? Well, it comes up all the time. You cannot help it. For example, in the news, Doris Duke, the billionaires, was living in Falcon Lair. And there's a whole big controversy about her butler getting the estate. He lives there now, and now I hear he's being moved out of Falcon Lair. I mean, just in the news, mentioning Valentino's house, a constant mention of the Whitley Heights house in Wedgwood Place. In the Architectural Digest, just recently, I had the privilege of working on that issue. They did a whole section on Whitley Heights. Whitley Heights, if you don't know where that is right in the center of Hollywood, right by Going to Pass, where many movie stars lived, and of course Valentino had his little house there. And it's gone now, unfortunately, because the freeway took it away. So you have to understand that constantly in the news, in the history of Los Angeles, the history of the restaurants and nightclubs, several books and films are being made about that, always mentioning Valentino. Where did Valentino go and eat? Where did he live? Where did he drive? Where did he ride his horses? Remember, he lived in Beverly Hills, he lived in Hollywood. There was a Russian Eagle restaurant on Sunset Strip in 1924 and 25, and Valentino used to go there, and to this day, people get it confused with the House of Blues. They say that this was the place where John Barrymore and Valentino used to eat and all that. Well, it's a little confusing because you have to understand that in 1925, the Russian Eagle blew up. It was actually blown up by a disgruntled employee. But they moved down the block to where today is the House of Blues. And Valentino was already dead by the time this happened. See, so his name floats where this famous sites float. And it's interesting also to note that I'm always asked, Valentino owned this building, or Valentino slept here, Valentino lived here, Valentino owned this, lived here, visited here. I mean, on and on with this. It still comes up. Everybody asks about Valentino and his life in Hollywood, the short life that he had. This is a testament in itself because Valentino is a symbol to this day of what the silent era in old Hollywood was like. And that's why I'm fascinated with him, and I'm sure most of you are too. So thank you very much for being here.
Actually, this is the Toreador song that we played during the picture Blood and Sand, because he was a matador, known to American audiences as a Toreador, bullfighter, and so we thought this would be an appropriate number to memorialize Rudolph Valentino.
It would be fitting, since this is a tribute experience to Rudolph Valentino, to observe the custom often in prayer, if we all stand. Thank you. Let us pray. Good and gracious giver of all life, we are grateful that we have made our way to this place today. We have shared in the adventure of what one life proved to be, as you granted him resolve and perseverance to make it happen. And we go from this place a bit more aware of what we might do to quicken the pace of our living and the commitment of our hearts to make our own lives express the special truth that you have for each one of us. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the 70th annual services for Rudolph Valentino. The mausoleum at the Hollywood Cemetery will be open if any of you want to visit his crypt. I don't know where we'll be next year, but we'll be somewhere. Thank you.